Hi everyone, the video you're currently watching is like a crash conference that I prepared for the Rencontre mondiale du logiciel libre, which will be held in July 2018 in Strasbourg. So I've been invited there in order to give a conference about Matomo analytics and GDPR. So for the one who do not know what Matomo analytics is, this is a free software in order to analyze the performances of websites and mobile app. Actually, his main competitor is Google Analytics, which is installed on something like 60 to 80% of the website around the world. And so here is Matomo, for example. And yeah, so this is a software in order to analyze the performances of the website, either from a technical perspective or either from a user perspective. So this is what this video is about. The speech that I'm going to give, as well as the slides, are not fully finished. So if you have the feeling that the slides are not well designed and that my speech is not very fluent and that my explanations are not clear, actually that's normal because I'm using this video in order to prepare myself. So consider it as a draft. If you have the chance to attend the Rencontre mondiale du logiciel libre, do not hesitate to come to the room where I am introducing it and presenting it for real. So it will be on, I think, should be on the 9th or the 10th of July. I do not remember exact the date, but I will be there in order to talk about Matomo analytics and GDPR. So I suggest that I start. So first of all, a disclaimer. So I'm not a lawyer, actually. I'm a web analyst. I'm an independent web analyst working on Matomo analytics since now many years, and as well as Google Analytics solutions. So I'm an independent web analyst, not a lawyer. I educated myself by watching some videos about GDPR. So there is two courses that I strongly advise you to have a look at, and because they're really told me a lot about GDPR. So one is the following one, futurelearn.com, and the other one is the other one is this one. So this one is in French, but it's really well explained. Actually, several speakers from this MOOC are coming from, were from the CNIL before, and actually some of them are still working at CNIL. So I strongly advise you to have a look at this one. And this one is fully in English and as well is very interesting. So I strongly advise you to look at those two courses. Those are the two I followed in order to educate myself about GDPR. Okay, that's the thing. So yeah, as I'm not a lawyer, actually, do not take for granted everything that I'm going to explain. Make your own opinion. Double check everything that I'm going to say, and so on and so forth. So actually, I cannot promise you that what I'm saying right now is 100% correct. But I don't know. As a web analyst and as someone interested in GDPR, I really did my best in order to interpret what the law is saying. So yeah, basically, I'm just a consultant doing training. I'm also an associate professor at the University of Angers since many years now. I had the chance as well to write some books about web analytics in general, such as uh, Matomo, formerly named Piwik, and as well as Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, and also App Inventor 2, which is an open source technology to create some apps. I really like the Matomo product, so I also wrote my own MOOC about it that you can find on Zeste de Savoir. So it's a French MOOC, but I don't know, if you are from France and that you want to discover what Matomo is about, then good chances that you will enjoy actually this course that I created here. There are some quiz and it's quite long. There are some videos and it's a bit interactive, so you may appreciate it. Yeah, I'm also passionate about web analytics, digital marketing in general, and I like Arduino and playing with IoT in general. And I also had the opportunity to give another conference about GDPR and web analytics. So you can have a look at it here. And I'm also working as a data protection officer, as an external data protection officer, which is somehow the guy who is in charge of GDPR implementation within companies. So yeah, let's talk about GDPR. So this is probably the case in which you were if you never heard about GDPR before. So I guess that all of you know at least what GDPR is about. And yeah, so to make it simple, GDPR is like, I mean, it's a regulation. So it's, let's say, it's somehow, I would call it like a privacy framework. So it's like a set of guidelines that actually all the European countries have to follow in order to respect and protect the privacy of user, of, let's say, of human being in Europe, at least for EU citizens. So it's very interesting because this regulation also apply to the people who are dealing with EU citizen data. So like companies which are companies, government which are located overseas outside of Europe and which are dealing with EU citizens data. It's also about EU companies, EU governments or whatever which are dealing with let's say non-EU citizen data. So, but who are, I mean, EU government and EU companies which are dealing with non-EU. So it's let's say a huge framework which is here in order to protect the privacy of human beings. So it's really like a revolution which happened last May 2018, and which is changing the way that actually companies, governments, association, and so on and so forth are dealing with personal data. So in this conference, I will assume that actually you have already a basic knowledge about what is GDPR. I'm not going to give that much definition about it. So feel free actually to already look at it on official privacy commissioner website, such as CNIL for France or any other privacy commissioner you may have, because actually this conference has to be mainly focused on Matomo analytics, a bit of Google Analytics, but Matomo analytics and how GDPR fits with Matomo analytics. So on the menu, which actually is going to change a little bit, I'm going to talk about many different things. It's going to be about how analytics fit within GDPR, what is the personal data under GDPR, and what are the personal data that you can collect with analytics package, and so on and so forth. So actually, this plan is going to change a little bit in this version, but anyway, I'm going to adapt. So as I said, this is a crash conference, not the final one. Okay, this part is really interesting. So GDPR is about all your information system within your company. Okay, it's about, let's say, the business cards that you are collecting within your company. Okay, from the different networking events you are going to. Those business cards that you are collecting are have personal data on it, such as the phone number, the first name, family name of the person, the email address, and so those are personal data. Okay, so this is paper information, of course, but the fact that you have the possibility to process those information make that actually those personal data are under the scope of GDPR. That's also the same thing for let's say the traffic which is coming on your website. Okay, every time that someone's going to connect to your website is going to leave some personal data on it, such as the IP address, which can somehow make it possible for some people to identify who is the person behind this IP address by crossing some different database. There's going to be as well the payrolls that you have for your employees, which are as well hosting personal data. It can be let's say your mail service provider, and so many different information system that you are using in order to process personal data that you have either internally with your employees, partners, and so on and so forth, but also from your prospect, your customers, and so on and so forth. So that's GDPR is a big stuff. It concerns all your information system that you have within your company. Within this information system, you have a tiny part, okay, a tiny part which deal with what I call analytics packages, which are solutions such as Matomo Analytics, which are hosted on your app, on your website, which are here in order to analyze, let's say, the traffic coming to your website. And this is what this conference is about. So just to make you understand that if you heard about analytics and GDPR, and that's the first time that you hear about GDPR, and you want to be GDPR compliant in the context of analytics, just to make you clearly understand that actually this should be a minor concern for you, because analytics is really a tiny part within your full information system infrastructure. So if I were you, if you never implemented any GDPR processes in your company yet, and you start by the door of analytics, that's probably not the main door I will take, because your information system has probably far more personal data which are critical that you should take care about before than dealing with your analytics. So just to give you an extra image, this one, right? This is an iceberg. And for example, from the outside, of course, the first thing that people are going to look at about your GDPR compliant system is the thing that they can directly see. So if I'm a visitor and I go on your website, probably the first thing I'm going to look at in terms of GDPR compliancy is your analytics infrastructure, probably your newsletter forms, or at least the emails that you sent me where you are prospecting, your privacy policy, your contact form, and so on and so forth. But just to let you know that this part is really the most visible part of the iceberg. Okay, that's the one that we can see publicly. But basically, all your information system, all your internal infrastructure and documentation of GDPR lies in the biggest part of the icebergs that you cannot see yet. So I've seen many people around me who just think that actually GDPR is about updating the privacy policy. Actually, this is really a minor part, but as it's a visible part, it's of course the one that people will probably ask you to be compliant for. But just to let you know that it's not just because you have your privacy policy page fine that actually you are GDPR compliant, right? GDPR is far more about internal procedures, security, than those visible elements that you can see here. So but as it's a visible part, I mean those four that I'm mentioning here, it's of course true that actually you will mainly see that on social networks where people are actually looking at your privacy policy page or your source code. For example, here they're saying, "Hey, you are using Google Fonts and you are using Google Analytics, so that's not good for the privacy of your user," and so on and so forth. As you can see, this is the most visible part, but you could actually be 100% fine within the information system part here, but forgot to do it within the privacy policy. So that's why even if it's a tiny part here, there are something that you should take into consideration to avoid actually receiving posts on social networks saying that actually you are not respecting the privacy of users. So in this conference, really, my expertise is just dealing with the analytics part. Okay, I'm not the one who's going to tell you exactly how you can be GDPR compliant for your full infrastructure system, but this conference is just about this tiny bit here. Okay, let's move forward. What should you do for your analytics under GDPR? Okay, I think that's really important. And the thing that you have to know is when you start with GDPR, the main thing you're going to look at is the official text of GDPR. Okay, it's 89 pages long. You can find it in your local language for sure, but if you look at all this part here and that you are looking at, I don't know the word like analytics, well, you can see that you cannot even find it, right? If you look at the word cookie, for example, you will only find it once. What I'm trying to show you here is that actually those 89 pages are not really focused, let's say, are not focused at all about analytics solutions. So that's why it's kind of very difficult to understand how GDPR applies to analytics system. Because as I told you, GDPR is big and analytics is really like a tiny bit of it. So yeah, here is my answer. Actually, that's it, right? This is how you can be compliant with your analytics system under GDPR. So it's kind of very difficult because you need to guess how GDPR needs to be applied for your analytics system. Um, why is that? Actually, the answer is what we call e-privacy, which is like another regulation which will come after GDPR in order to explain what we should do for a specific web solution, let's say, and it includes actually analytics. Okay, so if you were already scared about GDPR, how it applies, what are the consequences of it, and just to let you know that another stuff is going to happen, which is called e-privacy, which will give more clarification about how GDPR applies for specific system, including analytics. It has not been voted yet, so that's also the scary part, right? Because if you look at, let's say, the old, yeah, this is the old e-privacy, let's say, paper, which have been issued. So it was not voted. It's like the, let's say, the basic guidelines that they are going for, and then they discuss it, then they vote it, then they make some modification, and so on and so forth. And just to let you know that in the old version, which was in January 2017, this is what they were saying about cookies, which is one of the part of the analytics system. So user must be in control of any privacy sensitive information stored on their device without having to click on a banner asking for their consent and cookie each time they visit a website. Browser settings will offer an easy way to allow or refuse cookies. The proposal clarified that no consent is needed for non-privacy intrusive cookies, improving internet experience. Cookies set by a visited website counting the number of visitors to that website will no longer require consent. Okay, so that was clear that in January 2017 about e-privacy, if it was voted as it was there. Well, here is what I understand is that neither Google Analytics, neither Matomo Analytics will need a consent in order to fire a cookie on the browser of the user. And if you are picking up actually the new version that they issued recently, so I think it was in May 2018. Let's look at it. Yep. Okay. So it's gonna open and it's here. Okay. User must be in control of the information of the device. They must be asked for consent before information such as their photo, contact, or access, or when information such as tracking cookies, okay, used to monitor online behavior is stored. Okay, so here it means that on the 18th of May 2018, they finally went back to, let's say, the point that they wanted to make, and they finally reverse. So actually, right now, we do not really do on which foot we need to dance, let's say, because we just don't know what to do. It's just like changing from a paper to another one. So we are really waiting for a clear guidelines from e-privacy in order to say, okay, what should we do with our analytics solution? Okay, so that's why the answer right now, in order to be compliant with your analytics system, I do not have a straight answer. So what I did is I wrote to CNIL, which is the French privacy commissioner, and I asked them straight away, okay, what should I do if I'm using Matomo, formerly named Piwik, on my website? And I asked them, can I set it in order to be exempt from consent? And here is what they're saying is, I confirm you that the Piwik tool is, I mean, it's not is, it can be exempted from the consent request if it is set according to the big principles of the personal data protection. Okay, so here what they meant is exactly actually the same. It's exactly the same process that before, right? So, I mean, you need to inform user about the fact that they are going to be tracked, and then you cannot actually cross those data with another database, and then you cannot. I mean, you need to delete the data, or at least to not have the user being to be able to be tracked for more than 13 months. So you need to break the chain of the unique visitor, let's say every 13 months. Then you need to anonymize the IP, and then that's it, because that's almost the same thing that the point number 3 and 4 are doing. So this is the answer from the CNIL at the moment, which is, let's say that the situation is not changing from before. Okay, so keep the abyss that you had, and let's wait for e-privacy in order to clarify all of this at the European level, because this answer that they made is exactly the same as before, which was the directive which was applied just for France, and let's say the way that the directive was applied was different from any European countries in Europe. Okay, so that's like kind of a huge piece. So right now, the information that you have is, in order to be GDPR compliant with Matomo, well, you don't need to do much things. It's exactly the same as before, right? So do not process personal data. You have the right to track all the data that you want before getting. I mean, you do not need the consent in order to use Matomo. This is why um, this is the current situation. But, and I'm going to put a huge but, I'm going to explain why actually there is some differences when we are talking about analytics packages. And I'm going to explain this difference between Matomo and Google Analytics. And then you're going to see that I have the feeling that the privacy commissioner did not took into consideration that with analytics tracking tool, you can really process a lot of personal data, and then it should be more concerned about GDPR than just the e-privacy part. But I'm gonna explain that a little bit in a second. First of all, let's talk about Google Analytics. So, well, you have to know that every time that you go on a website, whatever it is, you have Google Analytics, which is set behind. And the point I wanted to make in this presentation is that when you compare Matomo Analytics and Google Analytics, you are clearly comparing two different solutions which are doing stuff which are totally different in terms of GDPR. First of all, Google Analytics to me, and once more I precise that this is my personal opinion. Okay, this is linked to the disclaimer slide that I explained before. Google Analytics, as it is installed on many websites around the world, as I say, 60 to 80% of the website, to me, this is the definition of what we can call the processing of personal data on a large scale. Okay, it means that whatever the steps that you are doing on the internet, I don't know, we are something like 4 billion users in the world using internet. It means that in any cases, Google has the full database of all those people going to the website. So I guess that Google Analytics is considered as a large scale processor, and under GDPR, actually, it has some consequences. That it means that actually Google Analytics, or at least Google, need to follow a lot of guidelines dealing with dealing with personal data. The second thing is Google Analytics Google has another solution which is called Google AdWords and advertising platforms, which can be linked with Google Analytics. So this is mainly what we call remarketing. And based on those cookies, which will be set when the user will do some specific things on the website, then it's considered as an automated decision making process, which includes profiling, which means that actually Google Analytics has another step of responsibility to include. The other part I wanted to make about Google Analytics is that data are stored in the United States of America, and in terms of privacy, that may be a tiny issue due not due to the fact that it's based in the USA, because if you look carefully about what GDPR is saying, they are saying that when there is a transfer of personal data from a European country to a country which is overseas, then actually you need to investigate if actually this country to where you are sending the data to is providing a high level in terms of security and privacy. And if you look at what we call the privacy shield, Google is registered within the privacy shield, so it should be fine to send actually basic personal data to the United States. However, the point that I'm still wondering is the Cloud Act. So the Cloud Act is an act which has been signed recently by Donald Trump, which is saying that if the data are hosted in a country which is outside of the United States, but that those data are hosted by a company which is American, then the United States has the right to request an access to those data, right? So, which means that the data which could be physically stored in Europe, for example, in France, in Ireland, and in Germany, which are owned by an American provider, such as, I don't know, Google, Amazon, or any kind of cloud hosting platform that you can imagine, means that actually the United States have a power on it. And to me, it's clearly an issue in terms of privacy. So this is a point where we need to see what the privacy commissioners in Europe will say about this Cloud Act, if it's fine actually to host personal data from an American provider which hosts the data in the Europe, or if it's a problem. Okay. And as well, the point which is as well very, very important is actually it's not possible to process. I mean, it's technically possible, but it's not allowed to process personal data on Google Analytics. And to me, that's the biggest point that few people see about Google Analytics and GDPR, right? Because it's clearly written here within the condition of use of Google Analytics that you are signing up when you open an account on Google Analytics. You will not and will not assist or permit any third party to pass information to Google that Google could use or recognize as personally identify information. You will have and abide by na. Okay, so it's clear and it's straight away that actually you cannot use Google Analytics in order to process any personal data, right? So credit card information, email addresses, and so on and so forth. So um, this is this is a key point that I wanted to make in terms of difference between Google Analytics and Matomo Analytics. So with Google Analytics, those are the different points you should look at if you are dealing with GDPR. Whereas about Matomo, what you need to consider is that Matomo is not processing personal data on a large scale. That's almost for sure. The only way you could actually process personal data on a large scale with Matomo is, let's say, if, for example, you are a big company, and within this big company, so you have many employees, and those employees need to use a specific platform every day in order to, let's say, um, work. Okay, simply said, right? So which means that actually you will have the possibility to massively track all your employees, like hours by hours, or all their activity with a single Matomo. And then in this case, yeah, probably it could be considered as a large scale processing information system. And if it's the case, then you know that your company will have additional obligation to respect in terms of GDPR. So, for example, like having someone specialized in GDPR within the company, so data protection officer, because this is definitely what is asked. as an obligation when you fit this condition. Matomo is not doing any automated decision making process, including profiling, even if I guess it's technically feasible with some specific plugin, for example, by analyzing the behavior of some people, then to fire them specific information, specific banner advertising within your website, and that kind of thing. But that's, I mean, so far I've not seen it. So even if it's technically possible, Matomo by default is not doing any automated decision making, including profiling. Data are stored wherever you want. So that's where actually you are fine in terms of GDPR if you host them in Europe. And just to let you know as well that with Matomo, you can process a lot of personal data because that's the key thing with Matomo. That's a free software, so you are free to do whatever you want, and processing personal data is not a bad thing. Okay, GDPR is not saying at any moment that processing personal data is a bad thing. GDPR is about how to protect the use of processing personal data. Okay, so that's the big part here. Okay, so I really wanted to make this difference between Google Analytics and Matomo. We are looking at two different solutions, which are, to me, not I mean cannot be compared in terms of GDPR because the way they work is totally different. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about GDPR. So here is my point is that if you want to deal with GDPR and ask yourself the right question is, first of all, is okay, is the data I'm dealing with is a personal data? Okay, if the answer is no, then it's out of the scope of GDPR. If the answer is yes, then this is within the scope of GDPR. The point is then what is a personal data? Okay, and under GDPR, personal data is any data which is able to identify an individual or to be able to identify indirectly actually an individual. And out of those data, actually, there is one which is of paramount importance in analytics, which is the IP address. So as far as you are using and processing the IP address of the user, then you are within the scope of GDPR, which means that you have a full set of obligation to respect. If you are a Matomo user and that you do not want actually to follow GDPR guidelines, what you should do is actually you should not process any personal data. And by chance, Matomo wrote a full documentation about how you can avoid GDPR by processing no personal data at all. So you have to know that when the data is anonymized, it's not considered as a personal data anymore because that's anonymized. So if you want actually to use Matomo without going through the whole documentation stuff of GDPR, you should anonymize your IP address by using within the admin panel of Matomo the following settings, right, in order to remove the last 2 bytes of Matomo analytics. But then actually this change will have some consequences of on your data. But this is totally fine as this is exactly what you expect to do to have when you anonymize the data. Then this part, of course, have to be discussed with ePrivacy, but let's say that ePrivacy will decide that every cookies needs a clear consent from the user. Then in Matomo, you have the possibility to disable cookies. So of course, your data will be, let's say, from your point of view, let's say a bit biased, but at least you will, by disabling cookies, you will get out of the scope of GDPR. Then you need to pay attention to the URL that you track and the title. So for example, let's say that you are tracking a backend where on the backend you are measuring, for example, the performances of your user when they are buying a product, and that within the URL you have like the ID of this given user, or at least his name or his identifier or something like this, then it means that you need to anonymize or you need to rewrite actually those URL pages in order to not track any personal data here. So this is where you will need to use the set custom URL feature. Then same thing, of course, if you use the user ID or custom personal data, which by definition are customized and personal, then of course you should anonymize them. Same stuff regarding the e-commerce order IDs. Same thing regarding the location, and same thing regarding the heat map and session recording. So you should pay attention about every time that you have a form on a website, and anonymize actually those fields. So Matomo is providing you all the, let's say, all the features in order to anonymize all those different fields and data. So that's the good thing. Okay, so that's the situation in which you do not want actually to process any personal data. So there is no, let's say, right or wrong decision here. It really depends of what you want to do. Okay, you can process personal data and then track people. It's not a problem. But then you have some obligation in terms of documentation, in terms of consent, and so on and so forth. And you can also decide to not process any personal data and then to get data which are less valuable to analyze. Let's say so. There is no really right or wrong here. It's about what you would like to do and how you're gonna respect the privacy of your user. So that's, let's say, the first case I wanted to introduce you. It's I want to use Matomo Analytics, but I don't want to use it. I don't want to deal with GDPR. If you want to process personal data, so let's say just the IP address or even just the cookies, even if, as we saw it, we are not even sure that actually cookies are personal data under GDPR. So we are waiting for privacy. The example I can show you is really here. So this is the official GDPR text. They are saying that natural person may be associated with online identifier provided by their device, such as IP addresses, cookie identifier, other, so blah, blah, blah. This may leave traces, in particular when combined with unique identifier and other information received by the server, may be used to create profile of the natural person and identify them. So, well, I know a little bit Matomo Analytics, and it's kind of hard actually to reach this point where from a single cookies, even with the visitor profile, um, I have no idea how I could access to a given user that I never know and how I could guess his first name and family name or who is behind. So I would say that's still not clear, and that's why we're waiting in privacy in order to know, okay, if all cookies are made equal, or in this cookie identifier, do they mean something else, right? So this is where it's not yet clear. Anyway, so let's go back to our point, which is about, okay, now we are using Matomo Analytics and we want to process personal data. How are we going to do this? Okay, in order to do so, there is a full documentation which has been written by the Matomo team. Okay, so first of all, there is two things you need to take into consideration. Is what we call the lawful basis that you are going to use. Lawful basis mean actually what is the reason why you are choosing those, where you are tracking the user. So actually, this is not the documentation that I wanted. I wanted to see what we call the lawful basis. Okay, lawful basis, Matomo. Okay, there we are. So yeah. So there's two lawful bases that you can pick up. I mean, in all there is like 6, but in the case of Matomo, there is only 2 that you're gonna take. It's either you're gonna rely on consent, or either you're gonna rely on what we call legitimate interest. Okay. If you rely on consent, it means that actually you will need to give to your user a system on which they will clearly say, okay, I want to be tracked with Matomo analytics. And until I'm not giving you this consent, you do not have the right actually to process my personal data. So if you choose this lawful basis called consent, it means that you are somehow protecting your user at the maximum level in terms of privacy, and you are, let's say, respecting all his choice. You are playing, let's say, cards on the table, and also that you will not get that much data. Okay, I do not have any study to show you here, but probably it means that the number of people which will probably say yes, I agree you to track me on my website means that actually your data will probably be around, I don't know, 5 to 10%. I mean, it's going to be very, very, very low. But on the other side, it means that actually you are like um, playing well in terms of privacy with your user, but you are losing something from the other side. The other thing you have to take into consideration is if you are going for this lawful basis, you're going to have to put in place a tool in order to measure this consent, and it's kind of a bit technical. If you go for the legitimate interest lawful basis, it means that actually you're going to inform your user um, about everything. Actually, legitimate interest is about providing them a lot of documentation in order to say, okay, guys, we are tracking you. Okay, we are tracking you. You know that, and here are all the information that we are giving you in order to say that okay, this is legitimate, right? We are doing it for goodwill, for a good purpose. We are respecting your privacy because we are not getting data which are too sensitive. And yeah, this is what legitimate interest is about. Okay, so that's really a choice that you need to make. It's either you go for consent or either you go by legitimate interest. If you go by legitimate interest, it means also that from an internal perspective, you need to write some documentation in order to clearly say, okay, I'm tracking people on this legitimate basis, and this is why I'm doing it. And in case of an audit, of an inspection from any privacy commissioner, you need to be able to show this document and say, okay, um, this is what we are doing with the data. This is why we think that this is legitimate, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, that's a choice that you need to make here. So, for example, if you go for legitimate interest and that in your documentation you are not, for example, justifying well why you are collecting and processing the credit card information, then of course you may be subject um, to a penalty or something like this, because it's kind of obvious that it was not a legitimate interest that you should have used here, but basically more use something based on consent or that kind of thing. I mean, all of those two different points need to be discussed from you internally in order to know in which direction you want to go. Okay, so once you define what is the lawful basis, then you will have a lot of things to deal with in terms of GDPR. So the point I wanted to make here is GDPR is mainly composed of three big parts. The fact that you need to respect the rights of your user, the fact that you need to really write a lot of documentation about what you are doing, how you are doing it, and as well about security. So this part is not, let's say, really well advertised by GDPR advocates, but yeah, to me, that's more like something like 20 to 30% of GDPR deals with security procedures. Includes, of course, HTTPS, independent databases, strong password, training of the employees, and I mean, there are many, 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 many things. So just to let you know that with Matomo Analytics, you have the possibility to respect all the rights of the user under GDPR. So there are many rights actually under GDPR. Some of them does not really apply to the analytics world. Some other do. So, for example, in the case of Matomo, the right to be informed has to be taken into consideration. So, it's the right to be informed is the privacy policy, of course, that you need to have on your website, but also what we call the privacy notice. So it's at the point of the data collection, you need actually to inform the user about the data that you're gonna process, for how long you're going to process them, and how they can actually oppose themselves to this data collection. Okay, so this is what we call the right to be informed. So here in the case of Matomo, they're explaining you actually how you should do it, how you should write your privacy notice in order to be GDPR compliant. They do not have yet the tool, but I think now with Matomo Tag Manager, it's kind of possible to do it. So here is, for example, an example of a privacy notice, right? That's kind of what we formerly called the cookie banner. And this is, I think, the kind of thing that now we can do with Matomo Tag Manager quite easily. So that's a thing. That's the right to be informed, which of course is linked with what we call the privacy policy, which is right here. So yeah, I strongly advise you to have a look at the privacy policy of Matomo because it's quite well done in terms of this copy. I think it's yeah, reusing this privacy policy. So it's kind of interesting. They give you the go in order to copy and paste, or at least inspire yourself from the privacy policy they wrote. And I think it's kind of interesting. So you should basically have a look at it. So yep, that's the first thing, the first point I wanted to make. Okay, right to be informed. It's for you. You need to document it on your website, telling okay, guys, I'm using Matomo Analytics. These are the data I'm collecting. This is why I'm collecting them, and so on and so forth. Then you have with Matomo Analytics what we call, okay, just hold on. So it has been already 46 minutes that I'm speaking, so I'm going to try to make the last 14 minutes quite fast. So then you have what we call the right to access. So in Matomo, you have the possibility, thanks to GDPR tools that they developed, to extract the data from a given user and to show him actually what are the data that you are processing from him. I can basically show you how it looks like. It's very interesting the way they developed it. Here I just have one point that I need to make with you is make sure that actually you are giving an access to the data to the right person. Because if someone is claiming to access to his personal data and you are giving away some data to someone who is not supposed to have the data to, then actually there may have some consequences and you will be responsible, of course, not um, of not securing your installation enough. So basically, under GDPR, you should take all the provisions in order to ensure that the one you are disclosing the data to is the one is claiming to be. It's kind of a challenge because it's not sure that actually an IP address is sufficient in order to prove that this person is really the one is claiming to be. So I could, for example, take an example. Let's say, imagine that you are using Matomo on a dating website, that someone access to this given website with a given IP, and then his companion, let's say his partner, is going to make a request to this website because he's, I don't know, thinking that actually his partner or her partner is cheating on her. And then if just based on the IP which is sending the request, you think that this is the same person, then probably you are disclosing the information to the wrong person. So that could be problematic. So you should take, as a Matomo user, all the security in order to ensure that actually the person is the one is claiming to be. Okay, so here's, for example, the right to access tool that I use here in Matomo. And here, yeah, clearly it's telling me, okay, here are all the action that this visitor made on the website. And if you are sure, for example, that this visitor is the one is claiming to be, then actually you can disclose him all the data that you are processing about him. So those are actually small visits. I do not have enough information in order to disclose it back to the user on his demand, but could be the case, and Matomo is giving you this possibility to get an access to his data. So that's really important. Then, yeah, you have the right of erasure. This one is really great as well. That's the possibility to get rid of some personal data. So you can see here, for example, I could select the delete selected visit, and if someone is claiming that it doesn't want to be tracked anymore within your database, then you can just delete all his data straight away, and that's great because if you compare it, for example, with Google Analytics, let's say that some personal data have been inserted within Google Analytics, then you do not have any possibility, at least as far as I know, to remove those data out of the database of Google Analytics, which means that you almost killed yourself, because if someone is claiming to access to his rate of erasure, then the only way you have is actually to contact Google, and then Google will see that you are processing personal data. So this is against the rules of Google Analytics, and then you will get strong penalties straight away from Google, because you put a user in danger uh, by processing his personal data and send them without his agreement. So that's problematic. Okay. How much time do I have left? I still have only 10 minutes left. Okay, so you have other rights that you can exercise with Matomo Analytics through the backend. So that's really important. Then, in terms of documentation with Matomo, you will need actually, of course, to mention that you are using Matomo Analytics within your privacy policy. You need to mention that. So let's see what Matomo did. Was it? Yeah, privacy policy. So how did they do that? Subparty. Okay. Oh yeah. For example, here they are using InnoCraft Cloud, which is the professional branch of Matomo, and they're saying, okay, why are we using Matomo? We are using it in order to collect and analyze information about how you interact with our website, blah, blah, blah. It's based on legitimate interest, the data located in France, what are the personal data collected, and where is the privacy policy. So, yeah, this is what you need to do if you want actually to be GDPR compliant from the documentation perspective. Then you need as well to document it within your information asset register. So it's like a huge document on which you are listing all the different information system that you have. So it looks like something like this when you are saying, okay, I'm using an information system for the payrolls, one for the personal file, one for recruitment, and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, if we are looking at, I don't know if we have an example here. Well, many information. Yeah, you can have a look here. Okay, so basically imagine that you are using Matomo. You should actually write all those information within your information register. Okay, that's this document that we call the information set register is where you mention all the different technology that you are using, what are they doing, which personal data they are processing, and so on and so forth. As previously said, within this conference, actually, this GDPR is about a lot of documentation, and Matomo will just be one tiny part of it. Then you need to apply security procedures, such as how you can such as securing your database. So there is a security recommendation listed it for Matomo, such as, if you find a bug, what should you do? Then separate your Matomo database from your other MySQL databases, use it over HTTPS, make some backup, and so on and so forth. Also, you need to mention Matomo within your data breach procedure. So if someone hack your database and disclose all the data just 1 hour after on the internet, then you need to have a procedure in order to contact all your different customer, or at least the person who are concerned about those data, contact as well the privacy commissioner in order to say, okay, we have a data breach, and and so on and so forth. And if you are working in an industry where the data that you are processing are very sensitive, so as I previously said, for example, could be dating website, could be a medical center, could be um, all the industry where definitely the data could be of paramount importance if there was a data breach, then you need to do what we call a data privacy impact assessment, which is like a special investigation or special audit on the specific information system in order to list everything that you should do in order to secure and protect your infrastructure if a data breach was appearing. So yeah, all I could say here is basically if you want to be Matomo GDPR compliant, then there is a lot of things that you need to go through as any other analytics vendor actually. And you will find actually all the information you need to follow here within the GDPR guide hosted on matomo.org. Actually, I still have 5 minutes left, so that's why I'm gonna try to end this conference right now. Just to let you know about the Cloud Act. So here I'm a bit concerned by the fact that Europe, as far as I know, not gave a clear answer about the Cloud Act and say if hosting our data with Matomo is fine within a big cloud provider, let's say an American company. We are waiting clearly for guidance here. Yeah, I will say, as far as Europe didn't say anything, better actually to stay where you are. And yeah, that was the point I wanted to make. So um, just to sum it up for this conference, how to be compliant with Matomo, you have actually the full documentation here about GDPR. Then here you have like the full checklist of the Privacy UK Commissioner, which is really well done about all the different steps you need to go through. So this is exactly the same thing as the Matomo documentation. It's just that the Matomo documentation is interpreted from those data, but you can like double check it, as I previously said in the conference, in order to see if on the Matomo website there is not any data which is forgot, for example. That's a thing. And then, yeah, I wanted to sum it up as well that if you are using Matomo Analytics without processing any dangerous, let's say, or sensitive personal data, then you should be fine and you should not risk anything if you are currently following the piece of advice from the CNIL or any other privacy commissioner, because we are waiting for e-privacy. So I'm sorry if in this conference you do not have the feeling yet that I have a clear answer on every part of the use of Matomo or Google Analytics, but it's just the fact that we are all waiting for e-privacy in order to have straight guidelines about what's going to happen. But just to make it clear as well that with Matomo you can really process personal data, but then if you are doing so, it's really cannot, to me, be considered as a simple analytics system. For me, it's a full personal data information system, and then you have some clear guidelines to follow, which are the guidelines that I previously show you on the Matomo website, which have been made by, let's say, interpreting GDPR and make it as fully and privacy compliant, because this is what this is all about. It's about respecting the privacy and the user, and how to make it clear that actually we are doing everything in order to be compliant with the GDPR privacy framework. I really hope that you liked actually this conference, and I really hope that some of you will leave some comments on this video in order for me to improve the next conference. I really hope I will have the chance to make an e-privacy conference about how to use Matomo under e-privacy. Thanks for watching.